how are you doing? And are you ready to dive into the black box? I mean, into the brain? Yes, this amazing organ actually not only allows us to love, but also make innovation. And there are a lot of practical questions in the air. For example, is it easy to influence the way people think, feel, and act? Or how predictable are we? Or how technology can help people become smarter and achieve a better society? And, of course, there are also ethical questions, some issues about how far can we go with artificial intelligence, for example, what we feel in virtual reality, and how does it influence us. So, let the journey start. And we have 3 wonderful speakers in our track, and a short discussion rounds after the talks. So please be ready to type your questions. If we have time, I can ask your questions from speakers as well. And now, firstly, it is my true honor to invite to the stage Dr. Thomas Metzinger, who is highly awarded philosopher, professor at the Johannes Gutenberg-Universität Mainz, where he is also the director of the Neuroethics Research Unit. And additionally, Dr. Metzinger is the director of the Mind Group at the Frankfurt Institute for Advanced Study. And this is not the whole story yet. Thomas Metzinger has written the book named The Ego Tunnel, The Science of the Mind and the Myth of the Self, which is actually translated into several languages. So let Dr. Metzinger open us the gate of consciousness first. Thomas, please, the stage is yours.
Do I have a clicker?
Okay.
You know what? I think you have no soul, and I also think nobody in this room has a self. I don't know if you've ever seriously thought about this. What would this mean if you had no self? Literally, not as some romantic fantasy or some crazy reductionist ideology. How would it come that you feel right now as you're listening to me as if you were someone? So I think you don't have a self, you don't have a soul, but you have something in your brain that I call a transparent self model. And I've brought 4 examples to you to show you what I mean by this. So how many of you have ever heard of the rubber hand illusion? That's right. That's something you can do at night, at home, with your friends, with dishwashing gloves. It was discovered in 1998. So what you do is you hide one hand and you have a rubber hand, and then you stroke both the unseen hand and the visible rubber hand with Q-tips you can use at home or with brushes. And the first thing that happens between 20 or 90 seconds, don't giggle, don't laugh, look onto the rubber hand, is that it becomes part of your own body. You feel consciously ownership for that rubber hand. But there's another even more crazy thing happening. You will feel the seen touch in the rubber hand, which means that you can construct this conscious sense of ownership by offering statistical correlations to the brain from the outside. So you offer these correlations and your phenomenology follows suit. So selfhood has a lot to do with ownership, with feeling that body parts are your own, that your emotions are your own, that your thoughts are your own thoughts. So try this with your friends at night in the kitchen, but there's something else you could try. If you do that experiment tonight, have a hammer ready or something. In the moment the illusion stands, for scientists, I'm a philosopher, but for scientists this is very interesting because it shows it's not only some high-level fantasy, the unconscious self-model in the brain believes it too. The unconscious self-model also believes that the rubber hand is part of your own body and needs to be protected. So it's a deep mechanism. So I think you have no soul and you have no self, but you have something like a transparent avatar in your brain. And you have to learn two concepts in the next 15 minutes. The first concept is the concept of a self-model. That's a dynamic representation of your body, but also of your psychological properties and your social relationships. So what you actually have is not a soul or a self, but a dynamic data structure in your own brain. So here is my second example for you. Do you all know what phantom limbs are? After amputations, people still feel the arm for sometimes 6 weeks. It becomes smaller and then it disappears. Well, here's a woman from Switzerland that was born without arms and legs. And since she can remember, she has felt phantom arms and legs. And if you look at the phenomenology of these phantom arms and legs, you find out some interesting things. For instance, the 3 middle toes are not differentiated. If you close your eyes, can you count your toes? You also find out on a scale from 0 to 7, 0 means no conscious experience, 7 means as realistic as my real body. You find that these parts of the legs are about half as real as the navel or the shoulders. So they are ghostly members. They are felt and owned. But then you find out other interesting things, like the right hand is more realistic than the left hand. The right hand has never existed as an input source to the brain. That's what I mean by a self-model. And you can do interesting things. You know, you can do now, you can touch your little finger and your ring finger and your next finger with your thumb. And you could put this woman in a brain scanner and say, take your phantom fingers and tell us when they touch each other. And you see exactly what areas of the brain light up in the moment of contact. So the self-model is really something in the brain, but the question remains, what is it that this woman's brain is representing consciously? What is it? Aristotle, an older colleague of mine, said the soul is the form of the body. Is that what it is representing? The shape in space? Many centuries later, Spinoza said the soul is the image the body makes of itself. So you see, we've been thinking about these things for many centuries in philosophy, and now I'm going to show you the third example, an experiment we did in 2017. So I had written about out-of-body experiences. I went to neuroscientists and said, I want a whole body version of the rubber hand illusion for philosophical reasons. And they said, you're crazy, it's not possible. The brain never sees itself from the outside. And then I said something complicated about virtualized meta-representation. And they said, philosophers are crazy. Wait a minute, we've got a virtual reality lab. And what we did is, we created a VR setup. So you wear these goggles, you are in a virtual reality, you are filmed from behind by a camera, and then a 3D encoder puts in the body, the filmed body in front of you. So you, for the first time, you see yourself from behind.
We stroke the back of the experimental subject. We had a camera not in front, but behind the subject, 2 meters behind, who was filming the stroking. and in real time projected this information to a head-mounted display, which was in front of the subject's eyes. So all the subject was seeing is the stroking, but now at your back, while at the same time you see your own body being touched by 2 meters in front of you. And some of the subjects reported that they very strongly felt that of stroking, the subject eyes, we displaced them to another position in the room, and then we asked them with eyes closed to walk back to the position. And when they were doing this, they actually did not go back to their real position, to my position right now, but rather were closer actually to where they saw the body.
So in VR, we can today offer alternative selves, surrogate bodies. Only few subjects really identified with this avatar, but you immediately feel drawn into it. You feel a drift towards the avatar, and you see if you disorient people afterwards and tell them, go back to where you think you've been standing, they go to a position closer to the avatar. That is, the spatial frame of reference in their brain has been changed by this whole body illusion. And that, of course, has something to do with the self model too. Now, the second and last philosophical word you have to learn today, it's the concept of transparency. Transparency was introduced by this philosopher a little more than 100 years ago. Consciousness is transparent. Of course, what you see here is not the bottle. The bottle is not green, right? There are no colored objects in the world. You see the brain's model of the bottle, and that model is green. But what you don't see is the process of construction. So we all live in a situation of direct realism. You really think you sit in this theater here, right? And you think you're out of your brain. Part of the reason for that is that your conscious model of reality is transparent. You cannot experience the fact that it is a representation. So transparency means that you do not see the window, but you just see the bird. Unless the window's dirty, but you just see the bird flying by. You do not see, right now, if you look at me, the neurons firing away in your brain. The only thing you see is what they represent for you, the speaker talking. Transparency generally means that we are unaware of the medium through which information reaches us. Conscious experience is a transparent interface. It's the medium in which all this takes place, but you are unaware of the medium. That is what we mean by transparency. So this already allows me to come to the only point I want to make in this short talk. If your self-model is completely transparent, then you get the experience of being a self, even if you have no self or no soul. That's the theory. You will identify with the content of that self-model if it is transparent. 2 more examples to give you an idea where this research is going. So this is the heart experiment. In this experiment, you have an avatar, you look at it from behind, and the avatar has a silhouette that is going on and off. But what you do is you synchronize it with the subject's heartbeat. This is because I, as a philosopher, said we will never be able to upload the self-model to copy it out into the brain into a large computer because it's grounded in bodily self-experience. Now here, your own heartbeat becomes visible to you in virtual reality. And as this experiment by Jane Aspel in England shows, that leads to a very strong identification with the avatar. It works very well because it is like an interior part of your bodily self-perception suddenly becomes externally perceptible. So that's one way in which research in this area is currently going. And you all know that your inside perceptions of your body and your emotions play a large role in identifying with it. Here's my last example. It's not my own work at all. These are these 2 geniuses in Herzliya and Tel Aviv, Doron Friedman and Ori Cohen. And they did the following thing. You lie in a scanner, and a system reads out your motor imagery. and you try to control the movements of an avatar. So you lie in a scanner and you imagine, I move my right hand, I move my left hand, I'm moving my feet, which means right, left, and straight. And after you have learned, just with motor imagery and decoding classification algorithms in the scanner to control an avatar, one can do the following thing. One can send the high-level motor commands from the scanner to a robot, but you wear goggles and you look out of the eyes of the robot. And this, in the case I'm showing you,
the decoded mental activities are sent over the internet to France.
4,000 kilometers. You are in the scanner in Tel Aviv. This is what you see. This is your colleague in Montpellier in southern France.
The humanoid robot in France receives the high-level commands and performs them. The subject in Israel sees the world through the eyes of the robot in France. An assistant in France gestures to the subject, suggesting the areas to explore in the room.
So this is not real time. The scanner puts in a 2-second delay, but if that causal loop from your brain into the robot through the eyes of which you look gets robust and stable, the causal loop will get transparent. And then you will have an extended self model and you will fully identify consciously with that robot. And that's what transparency means. If you have a self model in the brain or extended to a second body and the connection is transparent because you cannot see the construction process in the brain, then you get the phenomenology of identification. You get the phenomenology of this is me, I am this. Now, we are all biorobots, right? As you are sitting there. And the only thing I wanted to say today, and this is already the end of my talk, is that we are all in a very similar situation right now. You are right now a biorobot with a conscious self model, but because it is transparent, you identify with the content of your self model, and that is why you think you are someone right now when you have been listening to me. You are in a condition where you identify with an inner image of yourself, and I think that's not reductionist nonsense. I think this is a new view on human self-consciousness that has great philosophical depth and great spiritual depth as well. Thank you very much.
So yeah, as Eva-Maria said, I'm actually an Estonian, but I do represent Scotland here, and in particular this very ancient city of Edinburgh. It's actually such an ancient city that even the part of the town which is called Newtown was built about 200 years ago. And now, because this is a technology and innovation conference, I thought I would start by saying that Edinburgh has given to the world some big thinkers and innovators as well. For example, we can think of Adam Smith. I'm sure everybody who's learned something about economy knows Adam Smith. Or we have great philosopher David Hume, who's from Edinburgh. Or speaking of innovators, we have James Watts from Scotland, who probably created one of the most consequential inventions ever, which was steam engine, which set in motion the Industrial Revolution. Or we have Alexander Fleming from there, who created penicillin, which revolutionized medicine. Or we had John Baird, who was very instrumental in creating our great friend television. And Alexander Graham Bell was from Scotland. And here, last but definitely not the least, is my favorite one. This gentleman is Alan McMaster. And he invented one of the great kitchen gadgets I'm sure every one of you has in your home, which is toaster. Right. And Edinburgh has given to the world also Harry Potter. This is a cafe in Edinburgh every tourist goes and sees, which is where a lot of the book was written. And it has also given the world a couple of billion-dollar tech businesses, which is relevant to this conference, such as Skyscanner, for example, or FanDuel. But this is not what I'm going to talk about here. I will come back to this briefly later to make a point, but what I am going to talk about is human personality research, because I am human personality researcher, and I will try to connect this with technological innovation. So what is personality psychology? I think personality psychology is the field of psychology that deals with some pretty fundamental question about human nature, and precisely the kinds of question that when you think about psychology, they're the kinds of question you probably think about. So what we do, we measure, we take a lot of measurements of people, how people differ in their thinking, feeling, and behaving. And then we ask questions such as, how do people come in the way we see them? Why do they have these kinds of characteristics as we see them having? Is it in their nature, something in them that makes them behave in a particular way and appear in a particular way, or is it life circumstances that make them appear as they do? And now that people have these characteristics, do these characteristics matter in the real life of people? Are they consequential? Do they matter for the success that people have in life, innovation, all these sorts of things? So a lot of this boils down to one pretty simple question in my view, and the question is that do people shape their own lives, or do things just happen to them in their life? So we can bring this into the context here and now, and we see that you're here, but the other people, your friends perhaps, decided not to come here. And some of you already are or will be involved in innovation and all these sorts of things that are talked about here, and some people aren't, right? And some people go on and become serial entrepreneurs, and some won't. So why is this? Is this because of something in people that makes them do that, or is it just some coincidences? Maybe lucky, maybe not so lucky coincidences. So I think what the scientific evidence that we have so far says pretty firmly is that people are in charge how they are, how they behave, and what they end up in the life. Then almost nothing just happens to people. Like, it's very, very difficult to find an example of something that just has happened to people, irrespectively of their own input into this. So one line of evidence that helps to make this point is when we think of some of the most powerful experiences that can just, presumably, just happen to people, born into a particular culture, for example, or born into a particular family. Surprising as it is, people from very different cultures from across the globe, they tend to be very similar to each other on average, whereas in any given country, people differ many, many times more from each other. Okay, so next time you act them based on some national stereotypes, think twice. Probably these are not very correct. And the same goes for family. So being raised in the same families, sharing livelihood experiences doesn't seem to make kids any more similar. I know this is a very surprising finding, and most people find it very difficult to accept, but this is what the evidence says. Family influences, where people come from in terms of their family environment, matters very little for their personality. So what is it? Is it in the nature of people? Yes, it certainly is, at least partly, because, and the evidence for this is that these ladies there illustrate this point, that genetically similar people tend to be more similar in terms of their personality. Well, they tend to be more similar in terms of just about anything we can observe about people. But certainly, genes is not the whole story. It's not only about gene. And one reason for this is that even if we take genetically identical people, such as twins who are identical, they are not identical in terms of their personality. Well, they are certainly similar, far more similar than just two randomly picked people, but they're not identical. And another reason for this is that despite great efforts and a lot of money that has been put into this, we haven't been very successful in tracing the personality, human personality in human genome. In fact, we don't know of any personality genes at this point. These attempts haven't been very successful. So next time you read a news where somebody says that we've discovered this personality gene or something, they probably are exaggerating at best. And it also goes for the brain. We don't have really strong evidence for something being clearly different in the brains of people with different personalities. So these fancy, colorful brain pictures in relation to personality, they don't seem to work that well. So it might seem a little bit like a paradox then, right? I've said that, well, yeah, there are these environmental things, but they don't matter that much. And then there are these genetic influences, and they don't matter that much either. So what is it then? And personally, I don't think that this is a paradox. I think both things matter. The stuff that comes from within people, genes, this sort of things, and the life experiences that people have as they go on in their life. But they do this in a kind of nice way where they talk to each other and they play together this little game, which I will illustrate to you. So what it is that people become, what I want to say is that people become what they are by actively designing their own life experiences. So what happens is, imagine some children, they have some characteristics, they differ from each other in these. Some are more talkative and some are more cooperative and some pay more attention to details and all these sorts of things. And these characteristics surely to some extent reflect their makeup, how their brains are built, and this can be traced back to genes. And now what starts happening is that these people, children and adults, they start creating their own life experiences as they go on. And they create these life experiences in such a way that these experiences match their own characteristics. Surely at any given time, for any given behavior or life choice, there are a million reasons why people do one thing or another, and their personality, the stuff that's within them, is only one of the reasons. But over time, these small, little probabilities tend to add up and become a big influence the personality has in life. It's kind of like a snowball that builds itself up. And what we see is that people with different personalities tend to have vastly different life experiences, because personality is related to education, to which kind of jobs people have, how much money they make, which kind of relationships they have, well, just about anything, health, even longevity. And now what then happens is that these experiences that people have created for themselves based on the stuff that's within them, this experiences starts influencing people back. And this sets in motion a kind of feedback loop. So for the context of this talk, I will call this a general law of personality. And it's something like this, that people seek environments that match their personality characteristics, and these self-created environments then deepen and maintain these characteristics. So it's both environment that's from outside and the stuff that comes from within people, like genes, for example. Okay, so now the point I want to make here is that this law applies more generally than just in context of personality research, and specifically applies in the context of, or is relevant in the context of technological innovation as well as entrepreneurship, the kinds of things that are central in this conference. So we can think about this at the level of single individuals, and later we will move on to more broader societal level. So one way to think about this, that so if you are interested in innovation or starting some sort of company or something like this, is it something that's from within you? And certainly I can say that to some extent this reflects your genetic makeup and this reflects your personality and so on. I think I already made this point. But what I want to say is that I don't think that there is any evidence, or there ever will be any strong evidence for things like I've heard this concept of founder genes, the specific genes that are in people who become involved in a specific lifestyle. This is for the simple reason why this is the case, is that genes code for proteins, and these shape bodies and brains. They don't specifically influence behaviors. And what we know so far is that most genes or genetic variations in DNA, they are not specific to particular functions or particular characteristics, but they manifest across the whole organism. So one gene, many things that it influences. And what we also know is that any characteristic that we can observe is at least indirectly probably influenced by millions, up to millions of little DNA variations. So I think we can dispense with this idea of one or a couple of founder genes for now. Right. And it also takes a certain environment for kind of characteristics or behaviors or lifestyle to emerge. So there has to be a cultural environment for innovation for this kind of behavior to emerge, because in another environment, the same genetic influences that people have them would probably end up them in very different roles. You could be probably an explorer or some religious fanatic or something like this in a different environment. So now this brings back me to where I started this talk from. I mentioned these innovators from Scotland. So we can perhaps make the point that some specific periods of time, this environment there has allowed people who have some kind of characteristics with them to successfully become innovators and creators. And maybe the same thing is happening now here in these societal circumstances in Estonia and the countries here that are represented here. So now we can turn this question the other way around and think that if you already have become involved in this sort of lifestyle, will this influence your personality? And I think we can say that it possibly can do that. But more specifically, I think what it does, if it influences the personalities, it doesn't evoke some new characteristics in you, but rather it deepens the kind of things that are already in you, because this is the kind of feedback loop I was talking about before. So this was the individual level sort of interplay between personality and technological innovation. So now I move on to more broader societal level. So remember, this was the general law, part of the general law I mentioned before. People seek experiences and lifestyle that help them to express their personality. And here I want to make this argument that this rule that we have learned about human personality is something that actually drives at least part of technological innovation more broadly. Because what technological innovation often wants to do is help people to do exactly that, to express their personality and find a niche where they can fit themselves more comfortably in, to live more comfortably with themselves. So some examples of this, we can think of services that tailor the information that we experience. Okay, social media, Google, what they do is they filter the information for us such that the information is more comfortable for us. It's consistent with what we want, our preferences and so on, and it filters out the information that isn't that, right? And all tailored ads and offers, we can think of apps and gadgets that make us feel more comfortable. I read this morning from BBC that now the life of religious people in England has become more easier because the Church of England improved the use of Amazon's Alexa in such a way that Alexa can now read prayers for people instead of people themselves. So that's one example of how a gadget make it more comfortable. And virtual reality is an excellent example of that. So if it eventually starts working properly, how people can tailor their life experiences in such a way that they are consistent with what they want and prefer. And the same works the other way around, because there are some experiences that people are desperate to avoid, right? Because these are not consistent with them. And technological innovation, again, is partly driven by the fact that it wants to satisfy this need of people. It wants to be, if people find something terribly boring or dreadful, innovation helps us to avoid these life experiences. Okay, so I think that technological progress, what it more generally does, it makes it easier for people to find these kinds of niches in life that help them to live with and express their personality. Or we can put it the other way, it helps us more comfortably to slip into our comfort zones. Okay, so it seems like a good thing for people, right? Because we can live a life that is more consistent with us, we can be better us or more of us, and this is what innovation helps us to do. But I think there is also might be a possible kind of negative side to this. And this is what I want to end the talk with, is what I think is it could lead to, at the societal level, in a kind of stratification and polarization. And one way to exemplify this is when we think of political orientation that people have. Let's say there is this dimension of from conservatism, from liberalism. Imagine you're a conservative. Now, what the technological innovation has allowed people to do more comfortably is to filter the kind of information that is consistent with their conservative beliefs. And avoid the information that would challenge your beliefs, to engage with people who are like-minded to you, and avoid people who would come and challenge your beliefs. And perhaps you have more time to engage with this sort of lifestyle as well. And now there are these other people, more liberal people, they do exactly the same, right? But it's just that they go in a different direction. So what happens is that people might drift apart in this dimension from each other. Okay, and in a way, this is already happening. When you think of this Cambridge Analytica scandal, you have must heard about this. This is exactly what they did. They identified people based on their personality characteristics and delivered to these people kinds of political messages that they thought were consistent with their personality, and then hoped that these people would drift further in a particular direction, and this would help some candidates. Right, so to wrap up, what I've argued here is that there is a basic principle of personality development, and I think it's tightly connected to technological innovation in the sense that it is underlying, at least partly, technological innovation, but this innovation that is then happening is also helping this principle to thrive. Right, and it has mostly positive effect, I'm sure of that, but it also has some possible downsides that we as a society might at some point start discussing seriously. Thank you.
technology. It's, in a broader sense, something that we humans have perfected and improved over thousands of years. And sometimes it doesn't work. So we have improved it, and we have made it more complex. We have made the world more complex, and also we have made some problems for ourselves. So can this same technology now be turned upside down, helping us to improve ourselves, to make these complex decisions more easily, and to get us out of this mess? So, as has been said, my name is Madis, and I am studying computational neuroscience at Tartu University. So what it basically means is that I'm trying to figure out the brain in a very algorithmic level. Basically, I want to know what is the software running inside our heads. So it's only natural that I'm very interested to see and to read up on all these technologies that help us bend reality, hack our brain, and make us something different than we are at the moment. So since we are usually using our brain in an environment, then like the easiest way to add some smarts to us would be to just add more information to the environment. So let's say some visual information that is otherwise hidden. And like that's just one random example of this future of augmented reality, where wherever you look, you see much more than is actually there. So there are a bunch of devices out there. Most of them are already, I wouldn't say perfect, but they're usable. Well, maybe not the first one. I guess you have heard about Google Glass and how society was not ready for this thing that someone is looking at you and talking with you, but also recording your talk and then Googling at the same time. But even that technology actually has its uses. So let's give an example. Let's say you have a job that requires you to follow a manual very, very precisely, like step by step, and it's a huge manual, and you have to read up and then do something, and read up again and then do something. So that process of switching back and forth is actually quite time-consuming. So one way to make people smarter, in some sense, is to just let them wear the goggles, and then they can see the information right on in front of their eyes, floating in space. And for someone like looking from far away, you will look like a total pro who knows everything and knows what buttons to touch where. And also, the devices basically also allow you to actually like throw a big red arrow on this button that you have to click, and then that one over there, so you don't really have to think much, but you look very smart. But we can go further with this. We cannot just have some elements in the real world that are virtual. We can actually substitute the whole world. So that's the promise of virtual reality. And here are some examples of what you could do when you have the whole world under your control. And basically, the technology is, again, used a lot for training, for these industrial tasks. But one thing that is actually more interesting is using the same technology to transform the person himself, like transporting the self that we were talking about before. So headsets usually look like this, and the user that is inside these headsets really feel like they're somewhere else, and sometimes they feel like they're someone else. And this is good because from psychology we know that personal experience is very, very powerful and very has a lasting experience for us. And virtual reality is very, very, very personal. Here's one poor guy playing a very horrible game. And yeah, I think he got some phobias there, but we can use the same technology to also overcome phobias. So here are just some examples of how researchers have used the technology to make people better or smarter or faster. First example is if you have a fear of heights and you don't even want to stand on this stage because you could fall. We can train you with these VR goggles to then get used to these new heights that you might be conquering. and it works quite well. Also, we can fix the problem of people being too racist by giving them this experience of acting in the body of another race. So, and after these experiments, people have reported that, yes, they now feel more empathy towards the other race. And also, we can make people more environmentally friendly by letting them cut down a virtual tree, and later we see that they are slightly more environmentally minded when using paper, for example. So these are actual studies done in the scientific literature. But these things all rely on you being able to see and hear stuff around the world. Can we go deeper? Can we go straight into the brain? And the answer is yes, we can. So there's a big race going around of devices like these, which basically go around your head. They look a bit different, but they're basically all the same. They have like 2 electrodes and a small current that runs through your brain. And it might sound weird, but it has some basis to it, because depending on where you put the electrodes, you can get different results, because in the brain, processes are in different parts, and when you zap here and there, you might get benefits such as faster training times, or better emotional control, or better math ability, and so on. So it has been shown to somewhat work. But can we go even deeper? Can we twist the knob to 11? How do you hack the brain if you already are hacking the brain directly? So one way to do it is to bypass the brain completely. So this is a new idea that recently emerged from a leaked video from Google, which was meant for their internal use and just like a practical, philosophical thought experiment about this selfish ledger, which basically means that, let's say there's an algorithm that knows everything about you, absolutely everything, everything you have ever done, basically everything you have ever thought. So the idea is that you can upload all this data to this algorithm, and then it compiles and gives you back your life goals. And you actually have a choice of which life goal do you want to pursue. And when you click it, then after this, it's smooth sailing. You don't have to think anymore, because Google tells you what to do, what to eat, where to go, who to meet, and so on. So it's super comfortable, no brain needed. But there's a problem with all these technologies. Even though they sound very good and very optimistic and positive, I think that they are very complex and very specific solutions to very low-tech and actually very general problems. So if the idea is that we want to improve society at whole, then these technologies might actually not be the best approach. And just to give you some examples of why would that be, start again with augmented reality. As I said, yes, it works well in this very sterile and optimized industry environment, where you have this complex machine, and you have the model of the machine in 3D as well, so the headset knows what it's looking at and can tell you what to press. But when we want to try the same thing in real life is messy, and we don't have a 3D model of real life, so it would be very hard to know, like, where should I like console the person so they would feel better if I don't have the model of the person, and then it gets really nasty very fast. And who's to blame then? Is the headset or me? So it works in some conditions, very difficult to make it work in others. With virtual reality, the problem is that we should never forget that virtual reality is always a lesser reality than real reality. So meaning that it's always just a model of the real world, and we shouldn't train only on the virtual one. A good example is that when plane pilots train only in the simulator, and then they get to the real plane, then they get sick because it's wrong, because they have trained with the virtual model. So idea is that we shouldn't substitute VR for everything, because the problem is that the virtual world is not a perfect copy, which means that in the virtual world, I could probably walk off the stage and keep floating. But I don't want to try it here, because I still think that it's not true in real life. But that's something to keep in mind. Brain stimulation. Now, I can't say that it doesn't work, otherwise I will be sued. But I'm just going to say that there's many things that can go wrong when you try these systems in like an everyday situation, because the tests that have been done in like laboratory conditions. Everything has been carefully calculated and positioned on your head. And if you just put a random device somewhere on your head, the problem is that like this electrical current can go in many different places, and it could be that at best it doesn't work at all, or at worst it can actually make you like suffer from an even worse performance than you would when you're not using the device. So something to keep in mind. And about the selfie ledger, I'm just going to say that it's still very theoretical, but the point is that we actually already have a system or a central processing unit for all our data. It's called the brain. And in neuroscience, we say that use it or lose it. So if there are some neural connections that don't get used for many from a long time, they get pruned or cut out of the brain because they're just waste. So if you don't do your thinking yourself, at some point you won't be able to think at all. So, I have so much time yet. So I can philosophize a bit about why it is so that we think that these technologies still are very good, and we like to come to these conferences and read up and listen to all these new things and then buy some. I think there are two things here. One is this like general cultural attitude of like innovation is always good and we shouldn't doubt it and we should go with it. But it's not 100% sure that this is the case, that it should be like this. And the other thing is that we are here all smart people and we're experts in one field or another, but not both. So we're very smart and good at some things, but we know very little about other fields. So you might know everything about technology, but not much about the brain. That's why someone can sell you this magical device that makes you smarter, because by technical standards, it should do it. And by psychological standards, there's no way. So these two honest mistakes, and maybe we can fix these. But like the bottom point is that if we want to have these big and scalable ideas of how to change the world, then like becoming better people in a better world, there is no app for that. But the good news is we don't need one. Thanks.
One question that came to my mind is that if we create new and new technological assistance to help us be more and more effective and so on, perhaps our brains turn to be lazy. We lose kind of cognitive flexibility or the natural kind of thing which pushes ourselves to be more successful and go on. And so where is the border between beneficial assistance or senseless assistance or even harmful interventions? What do you think, Thomas?
Well, if you remember, I think this was present in all three talks, if you remember the rubber hand illusion, you see that tools get embedded into the self model when we use them. So that's actually a way to explain the evolution of tool use. As long as a monkey uses a rake, the model of the rake gets integrated with the self model. Now, the same principle will be true for all new software instruments, all new medial environments in Part 2, all the new apps. we use them by integrating them with our self model, and of course this changes us. We will have new capacities and we will lose some old ones. We will benefit from it, and there will also be risks that we maybe only discover as we go along. So if you want a concrete criterion, I think something we can judge it by is, does it really improve my quality of life? And in a more abstract way, does this new gadget, this new instrument, this new virtual reality environment improve my mental autonomy? So I would say a good basic value to judge all these new technologies is the user's mental autonomy, the user's capacity to control his own thought and attention. Does it enhance it or does it damage it? And I think that's a first proposal we could go by.
So we recreate continuously our developments, actually.
Yes, of course. And I thought also the notion of a niche is very important. For instance, virtual reality, augmented reality creates a new cognitive niche in which the human mind develops. And technology, science cannot help us with ethical questions or normative questions. We have to decide ourselves what we want in life and what we want to use all that for.
Or let Google decide.
Huh?
Or let Google decide.
Yeah, that's the problem. That's exactly the problem, because as we all know, Google is evil, right?
I would say that it depends on the person. Like, how much are you willing to be reliant on technology? So until the moment that the technology works, you can really have the headsets on and be a superhuman. But what happens when the headset doesn't work, right? So, like the example with augmented reality is that, yes, you can operate this machinery now very fluently, but you have no idea what you're doing. So when you encounter a situation that's new or unexpected, and there's not a script for that in the system, then you have no idea what to do.
René, what does personality psychologists say about that?
I don't know about personality psychology at the moment, but what came to my mind is I have a bunch of friends who have been very interested in cognitive aging, and what they try often to do there is they try to find interventions that help people to preserve their cognition as they get older. And the trouble they're facing time and time again is that it's very hard to find anything that really works. So it is true that people who are cognitively more engaged, they read more newspapers, do crosswords, all these sorts of things. They tend to be smarter in older age. But the problem is that it mostly reflects the fact that these people were already started before they started aging. So they have always been kind of smarter. Now, if we look at statistically, otherwise only look at people who had the same peak mental abilities, then these things generally do not work really. So now, when we turn this upside down, what occurs to me is that this use it or lose it thing, which is part of this, I don't think there is that much firm evidence that it works really. So it probably might be the case that if we don't use the brain that much, it won't do that much harm either, right? But then again, I think that I would probably agree with this and refer back to my own previous talk before, that what these technological innovations do is that they kind of push people into these niches, and people do not get challenged by other kinds of experiences. And it is up to us, of course, to decide if this is what we want. But in my own case, I don't think this is what I want. I would like still to be a bit out of my niche and get challenged by things that I don't feel that comfortable with. Yeah.
Well, and about personality, a little bit more. Is it really so that we can read personality by the tracks people leave into social media, or we can read the personality from behavior in virtual reality, for example? Because actually we had a plan with Madis and René, who is sitting here too, to create a personality test in VR. And actually, we faced with that many complexities that there was actually the plan that never went on.
Okay, so there
perhaps the personality is something we think we think in complex way, and it's something very verbal as well, not only behavioral.
Right. So I think there are two questions here. One of them pertains to virtual reality, and I don't think there have been that many attempts in that regard, but I would think the real, and again I refer back to my talk, the thing is that how people express their personalities mostly by selecting themselves into particular life niches, right? And so this really has to happen in virtual reality as well. They need to have the choice over the scenes or these experiences that they get into. If we just present everybody basically the standard kind of scene, this is not their natural personality that we are measuring, right? Now, the other question was about the predictability of personality from the kinds of digital traces that people leave behind in social media. And my short answer is yes, it's predictable, and it's highly predictable from social media, which has been the cause of some of the recent controversy around this exactly. And for example, there was a study which asked a bunch of people to complete a personality questionnaire about themselves, which was the kind of golden standard about personality. And then everybody was also rated by some other people who knew these people being rated well, such as their spouses or friends. And then they had information about these people's Facebook likes. And they trained, using machine learning, they trained models that would predict their self-reported personality based on these likes that people had done. And what they found is that from these models, it was possible to predict personality just as accurately as the spouses of these people would rate them. So the machines, well, it basically boils down to saying that machines were just as accurate in perceiving personality as the people's spouses were, which is quite remarkable. And the general rule there is that the more information you can throw in the model, the more data points, the more predictive the models become. The models themselves can be quite simple in machine learning terms. They're quite simple regression models, but just the more information chuck in the model, the better the prediction comes.
Does it tell anything about the algorithm or about the spouse?
Yeah. Well, I don't know how to answer this question. It tells about both, but I guess the point really is that spouses might not be the perfect standard that we should compare the algorithms to. And perhaps it's true, the self-reports might not also be a good golden standard for this, but I guess to the extent that we do trust these sources of information, people's self-perceptions and the perceptions of people who know them about their personality, machines can do just as well. It's up to us, of course, if we want to use this information in any useful way.
Let me just add 2 points. I've been working for 5 years in a project on virtual embodiment and robotic re-embodiment that was funded by the EU as a philosopher. And 2 things I've learned is that just from facial geometry, like people are trying to give avatars a really realistic emotional expression with the facial geometry, but you can also read out low-level action intentions of human users. You all have cameras on your devices, and so basically the tools are there just from your facial movements to extract what you will probably do next. And another point many people aren't aware of is motion data. If you control an avatar through motion tracking, and you move and you play with it, from these motion data, you can generate something like a kinesthetic fingerprint, like you can find out who that user was, because your way of moving your body, the geometry is highly individual. And since the NSA scandal, you know that the American Secret Service is in every telephone in this room, right? So these are completely new ways of tapping information. If you tap like visual geometry or motion data of users and you listen into it, one doesn't know, but this may give you rich personality-related information in the future that people can read out, from users of such devices.
From even static pictures, it's possible to make predictions about personality.
Really?
They're not as accurate as you would get from that or from Facebook likes or more kind of rich information, but you can read a little bit even from just pictures.
So Do we have questions from the audience? Anything thrilling about brain? Yes, please. Someone can... Okay, give it a microphone.
Hey, can you hear me? Cool. I was wondering, I want to know your opinion about the ethics on using neuromarketing techniques in order to sell better, to sell more, to using EEGs and all other sensors for the marketing purposes. What do you think about it? Like, is it ethical, or we don't even have to think about ethics in this way? Thank you.
Thank you. What do you think, guys?
I have founded a department, a small institution for neuroethics, and I hate the word neuromarketing because I actually think it's an aggressive move, and it is something that tries to attack the user's autonomy in making their own decisions. So, of course, neuromarketing will get, there's a lot of hype, but it will get cool and it will get effective in the future. And I think we should be very, very careful with that. Because in the end, it's not that you are supposed to buy a product, the user becomes the product through these technologies. You want the user, you want the consumer that you control. That's the actual target you're producing, not only the product you're marketing. And I'm very nervous about it.
And Madis, is it really, is it possible at all?
I know companies do it, but I haven't seen the results. Like, if you have two very good commercials, and one is said to be even better, then like how much better is it? Like, if you already have talented people who craft these perfect advertisements, then like does this thing even add any value? So I think a lot of money has been pumped into this, but I'm not sure if you can. You could just look at the commercial and say, yeah, that's good, or that's bad, and that's in the middle. And if you have 10 good commercials, then they probably don't vary that much.
Right. So it puts efforts into very expensive process, so wouldn't actually give back the...
You can throw endless money at this, but you get this diminishing returns. Like, at some point, there's no point when you have a really good commercial already, then just go with it. Like, if people hate your product, they won't buy it anyway.
Yeah, I think this is an empirical question. Like, you can actually study and quantify how effective these things are, but I think the ethical question is actually, there is no single answer, and everybody can, the best we can do is we can have an opinion. And personally, I do agree with Thomas, but I totally agree that it's just our opinion, I think. Right? There is no sort of given ethical standard.
Of course.
So, we have 10 seconds left.
10 seconds.
Thank you, guys, and let's hold our mental autonomy then, and enjoy our day. Okay, thank you for coming.
Thank you.